everyone, Novels Wonderland here. Thank you all for the love and support you've shown me and the channel.
Junji Ito, I Shall Smash Hellstar Remina. Chapter 111 to 120. Where did the big dragon girl come from? 1471 words. Hayashi Naoko's eyelid twitched. Her hands balled into fists at her sides, and the look she fixed on Kawakami Tomi was naked with anger. Ms. Kawakami, did no one ever teach you what manners are? A cold pressure settled over Kawakami Tomi's body, invisible but unmistakable. Ha! Ha ha ha, someone capable of teaching me. Kawakami Tomi raised the back of her hand in front of her face, her laughter dripping with imperious contempt. Right here. A resolute surge of will hammered into Kawakami Tomi's mind, cutting her off mid-sentence. The arrogant words died in her throat. Those beautiful eyes, brimming with mockery and disdain, went suddenly blank, her pupils losing focus for just a moment. In the gym, Amamiya Rin's body trembled faintly beneath the torture device. Cold sweat soaked through his clothes. But deep within those half-closed eyes, a small, unextinguished ember of will still burned. In the midst of that absolute agony, Amamiya Rin marshaled every last fragment of his concentration, moving through the stages one by one, counting the breath, following the breath, stillness, insight, descending step by step into dhyana, until he reached the state of a contemplative sight, and reasserted his will over Kawakami Tomi's consciousness. In the cafe, Kawakami Tomi sat with her head bowed, her shoulders rising and falling in harsh, ragged surges. A full 10-odd seconds passed before the convulsive trembling slowly subsided. When she raised her head again, Hayashi Naoko felt her heart lurch. It was the same face, breathtaking, devastatingly beautiful, but the feeling it gave off had changed entirely. The rose-like quality of before, that sharp, wounding glamour and arrogance, had vanished without a trace. In its place was something inward and composed, a calm, settled stillness. She lowered the hand she had been resting her chin on and straightened her posture. Her gaze settled on Hayashi Naoko. The coquettishness and mockery in her eyes had been swept clean away. That gaze was quiet and intent, the kind that seemed to lift you out of the background of the world, to make you the only thing in the room. The bell above the door, the sunlight through the window, all of it seemed to dim in that instant. The woman's entire world appeared to contain only her. I apologize, that was rude of me. Please, go on. I'll listen carefully. What changes did Ms. Kawahara Miyuki undergo after the courage test show? She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, fingers laced together beneath her chin. Sunlight fell through the window and cast a soft halo along the perfect line of her profile. The beauty was still there, still devastating, but it had settled, like water running clear over stone. It was no longer aggressive. Instead it gave off a contradictory magnetism, a charm that transcended gender. Staring at the young woman across from her, Hayashi Naoko found the fire of her anger dissolving, strangely and almost against her will. She averted her eyes on instinct, unable to hold that too direct gaze, and felt her heartbeat skip inexplicably. She raised a hand and rubbed her right eye. The odd fluttering in her chest faded. Only then did Hayashi Naoko gather herself and find her words again. After that, Miyuki became strange. She'd start murmuring things no one could understand, muttering to herself at odd moments. A few times I found a knife in her bag. Once, just before filming was about to start, she suddenly left the set. I followed her. She went back to the abandoned building they'd used for the paranormal show, and I watched, with my own eyes, as she killed someone. She drained every drop of blood from the body and smeared it all over herself. The person standing there wasn't Miyuki anymore. That expression on her face, that look of madness, it burned itself into my eyes. I don't think I'll ever forget that day, not for as long as I live. She said it all in one breath, then let out a long, weary sigh and rubbed her eye again. Elizabeth. Amamiya Rin murmured, thoughtful. What Hayashi Naoko was describing was almost certainly the truth. Smearing oneself in the blood of victims, that was the particular infamy of a certain famous vampire. The Blood Countess. Elizabeth Bathory. The legendary Hungarian noblewoman of the 16th century, who, according to tradition, murdered vast numbers of young women, and bathed in their blood to preserve her eternal youth. Kawahara Miyuki was obviously no Elizabeth Bathory, but the vampiric nature of her behavior made one thing clear. Hayashi Naoko, whatever she might be concealing, was without question someone in the know. I reported it to the police afterward. I reached out to other people too. But no one believed me. No one was going to believe that Kawahara Miyuki, the people's sweetheart, the national singing idol, was a serial killer who imitated vampires. Hayashi Naoko looked up at Amamiya Rin. Her eyes seemed to be asking, "Will you believe me?" There were holes in Hayashi Naoko's story. Amamiya Rin had already spotted the inconsistency. This wasn't simply a matter of being believed or not. A serial murder case of this magnitude, even if the police were skeptical, they would still investigate. And any investigation would turn up leads. So why not go to the police? He didn't ask. There was no point, he wouldn't get a truthful answer. So Kawahara Miyuki was perfectly normal before that paranormal show. People really have no sense of self-preservation. Amamiya Rin let out a quiet sigh. Kawahara Miyuki was like this. Hare's Kyoko had been the same way. These paranormal shows, always running headlong toward whatever was most dangerous. Why were people so enthusiastic about courting their own destruction? Let's go to the scene. Whatever happened, I need to see it with my own eyes before I can say anything definitive. Amamiya Rin rose to his feet, and said it plainly. Tracking down clues wasn't his strong suit. His main body was still under the rack, and he had at least 2 more hours before any break. He couldn't spare the attention to contact Kazumi Junya, and have him come take a look. Still, so much time had already passed since the first killing. He wasn't particularly worried that his amateur approach would contaminate whatever evidence remained. Hayashi Naoko had been waiting for exactly those words. She rose quickly, fell into step beside Amamiya Rin, and led the way out of the cafe. Amamiya Rin sharpened his focus. He followed Hayashi Naoko's movements, while simultaneously keeping a sliver of attention fixed on Kawakami Tomi across the connection. Meanwhile, in the rural distillery, Tomi stepped over the bodies of the loading workers and walked straight toward the main building. She pushed open the unlatched iron door. A wave of sweetness rushed out to meet her, and before her stretched a wide fermentation workshop. 20 enormous wooden vats stood in rows across the floor. Beside them ran 2 lines of wooden racks with planks laid across them as walkways, and a dozen or so workers stood atop those walkways, gripping long poles, stirring the fermenting mash inside the vats with steady, rhythmic effort. Everyone was hard at work. No one noticed her come in. Well, these ones should be fine, shouldn't they? Tomi raised her head, swept her gaze over the workers laboring away, and gave a small, self-satisfied nod. Stirring her blood and flesh every single day, it would be stranger if they hadn't gone mad. She climbed the creaking wooden steps and moved silently up behind one of the distillery workers. She didn't make a move on him yet. Instead, she looked down into the great wooden vat below. Inside the vat, the surface of the murky liquid was sheened with an oily film, the color of turbid pinkish flesh. You could even make out several fragmented faces drifting on the surface, eyelashes still perfectly intact on their lids, eyeballs strung beneath them, gazing upward through the pink liquid. When the stirring pole swept through, those eyeballs would tremble faintly, as though still alive. Deeper down, chunks of flesh in various sizes had settled to the bottom, dark tissue that resembled internal organs, mixed together with rice koji. Occasionally a bubble would rise from the depths, carrying with it fragments of muscle fiber that tumbled through the liquid, and for a brief moment, revealed the grain and texture of living meat. Ghost Fire Walnut Chan in P for more, Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Samsara Game, starting with Shirogane K. Help us unlock these community rewards. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals +1 bonus chapter for everyone. Chapter 112, Elizabeth's Portrait. 1,431 words. TCH. Kawakami Tomi's face twisted with undisguised revulsion. No, revulsion wasn't quite the right word. It was something closer to loathing. She reached into her pocket and produced a matchbox she'd prepared ahead of time. She drew out a single match. The moment it struck, an orange flame leapt to life, dancing against the dim light. As long as they didn't move, they were manageable, but the workers, faces slack with manic devotion, were churning the contents of the vats with all their strength, pouring nearly every ounce of their attention into the chunks of Tomi flesh and liquor sloshing below. These particular pieces of Tomi had never been touched by Aizawa Yuma's curse, and even reduced to scraps of meat, their allure still vastly outstripped that of Kawakami Tomi. The moment Kawakami Tomi struck that flame, the nearest worker stirring the vat snapped to attention. He wheeled around and caught sight of her holding the lit match, and his face contorted into something savage and feral. "What are you doing? What do you think you're doing?" He flung down his stirring pole and hurled himself at Kawakami Tomi with a shriek, his expression murderous, as if he meant to tear her to pieces. "Out of my way." Tomi didn't even glance at him. Her arm swelled and warped in an instant, and she swatted the lunging worker away with a single open-handed blow that sent him careening through the air. At the same moment, the match slipped from her fingers, tracing a faint arc through the air before dropping into the vat of flesh-pink liquor below. A soft hiss. The instant the flame touched the liquid, the orange light plunged downward, and then the oily film floating on the surface erupted into a bloom of blue fire that spread with terrifying speed. The floating fragments of cheeks and flesh curled and blackened in the flames. Eyeballs burst with wet pops, sending murky fluid splashing up over the rim of the vat. The sweet reek of fermenting liquor merged with the acrid stench of charring meat into something that seared the nostrils. Ayaha! Screams erupted from inside the vat, screams that didn't sound human. Not one voice but countless voices layered over one another, a shrieking chorus so piercing it felt like it could puncture an eardrum. In the wavering firelight, twisted faces bloomed and writhed, eyes stretched wide open, red lips contorting in silent anguish, opening and closing in the flames. "Stop. What are you doing? Stop it now." The workshop exploded into chaos. The other workers spotted the fire and dropped whatever they were doing, swarming in from all sides. They came with dark rings sunken beneath their eyes, their whites veined with blood, their expressions utterly unhinged. Tomi watched these maddened men coming at her with cold eyes. Her arms swelled and stretched with startling speed. She reached out and locked her fingers around the throat of the first man to reach her, and flung him into the men behind him, both of them tumbling together into a vat. Boxer shorts. Boxer shorts. Do you pathetic mortals really think you can defy me, Tomi? Before the rest of them could react, Tomi had already plunged into their midst. Her warped hands cut and clawed in motions so fast they left only afterimages. Amid dull thuds and brief, cut-off screams, any worker who came within her reach was sent flying backward at an even greater speed than he'd arrived. In under 2 minutes, every last worker lay sprawled across the floor, broken and scattered like discarded dolls, not one of them capable of further resistance. All they could do was stare up at Tomi with their bulging, bloodshot eyes. "Congratulations, you insignificant little humans. I have come to rule over you. Prostrate yourselves before my blood and my power." Kawakami Tomi rose onto her tiptoes, arched her body back, and made her proclamation to the fallen workers in a tone that was equal parts imperious and intoxicated. Looking up at that towering figure looming over them, even the workers who had already lost their minds felt a cold dread crawl instinctively from the soles of their feet straight up to the tops of their skulls. The wavering firelight danced behind her, stretching and twisting her shadow, throwing it long and distorted across the mottled walls and the broken bodies strewn across the floor. When the iron door of the workshop swung open again, every last worker had become Tomi's servant. On each of their heads, hidden beneath dark hair, a faintly pulsing flesh bud had taken root, its tendrils burrowing deep into the brain, coiling tight around their thoughts. Far away in Tokyo, Amamiya Rin passed through a narrow alley and arrived at his destination. This is the place. Hayashi Naoko, who had been leading the way, slowed her steps. Amamiya Rin sharpened his focus and looked up. An abandoned office building stood in isolation before them. Years of neglect had left its exterior walls crumbling and decrepit. Most of the window glass had already shattered. In the slanting afternoon light, the whole structure threw a long, suffocating shadow that fell over both him and Hayashi Naoko, pressing down with a palpable, leaden weight. Let's go. Amamiya Rin's gaze sharpened slightly, and he and Hayashi Naoko walked together into the abandoned building. The afternoon sunlight was carved into ragged fragments by the building's outer shell, slanting in through broken windows and casting a few dull yellow patches on the dust-thick floor. Fine motes of dust drifted through the air, dancing soundlessly in the occasional shaft of light. Amamiya Rin and Hayashi Naoko climbed to the fourth floor and stepped out of the stairwell into an open, undivided space. What had likely once been planned as an office floor was now nothing but bare load-bearing concrete pillars, standing in the dimness like silent giants. Over there. Hayashi Naoko's voice echoed through the wide, hollow space. Amamiya Rin followed her direction, his gaze cutting through the maze of amber light and pillar shadows, until it settled on the far corner of the fourth floor. Between several thick load-bearing pillars, a patch of floor had been cleared. Against the wall stood a table, on which rested a brass candelabra holding a single slender white candle. The candle's flame flickered and guttered, casting unsteady shadows in every direction. Scattered across the table and the surrounding floor were strange implements, what appeared to be silver-handled knives and small silver bowls, their edges smeared with unidentified dark residue, several clay pots left open, containing something desiccated that looked like a mixture of dried herbs, and various objects of uncertain purpose assembled from feathers and thin bones bound together. An old, yellowed book lay open. An Iron Maiden. It stood roughly the height of a person, its shape like an upright human-shaped coffin. The surface was dull metal, dark and aged. On the front, two hinged doors hung open, their surface pocked with rust. Visible on the inner face of the doors were rows of short iron spikes, their tips catching the dim light with a dull, baleful gleam. Amamiya Rin and Hayashi Naoko walked closer. The nearer they drew, the more clearly Amamiya Rin caught the smell, an unsettling blend of blood and dust clinging and thick. It was here. Hayashi Naoko couldn't help but press her fingers to her eyes, as if trying to scrub away the terrible sight she had once witnessed. Passing between the load-bearing pillars, Amamiya Rin noticed a faded portrait hanging on the wall. The woman in the painting was beautiful, beautiful to the point of looking almost pathological, beautiful in a way that carried an unmistakably sinister edge. Dressed in the unmistakable fashion of a European noblewoman, she was beautiful in a way that seemed entirely out of place in a classical painting. Elizabeth Bathory. Amamiya Rin murmured the name aloud. If his suspicion was correct, the woman in the portrait was the original, the archetype, of the great dragon girl. In a world where multiple distinct species of vampire and dark magic genuinely existed, Elizabeth had very likely been a true vampire in every sense of the word. Kawahara Miyuki had become a vampire in Elizabeth's mold, through some form of specialized dark magic. Ghost Fire Hii. Walnut-chan for more chapters, Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Samsara Game, starting with Shirogane K. Help us reach these goals. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals +1 Universal Bonus Chapter. Chapter 113, Rematch with the Vampire. 1,423 words. This is an Iron Maiden, a medieval European torture device. The interior is lined with countless steel spikes, and a container is placed beneath it to collect the blood of victims, gathered for use in black magic rituals. I have no idea where Kawahara Miyuki obtained knowledge of black magic, but she brought that medieval abomination into the modern age. Hayashi Naoko's eyes were filled with grief as she introduced the device's purpose to Amamiya Rin, both of them staring at the Iron Maiden before them. Not that Amamiya Rin needed the explanation. As Tsukiyoshi, this sort of background knowledge was basic. He picked up the yellowed old tome lying on the table. The pages were thick and rough, their edges worn and fraying. By the guttering candlelight, he traced the faded text. The script was Latin. Amamiya Rin had studied the language during his long sojourns in the dream world, through a Latin dictionary that one of the Tomies had read in a school library. He turned the pages slowly, and as he read deeper, his brow gradually furrowed. Ms. Kawakami, can you read the script in this? Hayashi Naoko asked, curious. Latin. The sacred language of the medieval world, because knowledge was monopolized by the church. Without waiting for Hayashi Naoko to press further, Amamiya Rin summarized the tome's contents. This is an ancient grimoire recording black magic rituals. Specifically, it describes how to preserve eternal youth through a particular ceremony, in other words, a method for becoming a vampire. At a specific hour, under a specific phase of the moon, one would drain the blood of a virgin through the Iron Maiden, stand before a portrait of Elizabeth, and chant the incantation while smearing the blood across one's entire body, a supplication for the vampire Elizabeth to bestow her power upon the supplicant. Once the ritual succeeded, one would gain the ability to live forever, never aging. The price, however, was eternal dependence on blood. At regular intervals, one would have to coat the entire body in fresh blood to keep it young. The ancients had been fixated on eternal youth. What Amamiya Rin focused on was the information the grimoire did not mention. The vampire he had faced before, whether or not she had preserved her youth was impossible to tell, but her physical capabilities had unquestionably far surpassed those of any ordinary human. She's here. Hayashi Naoko's figure flickered, and she retreated behind one of the distant load-bearing pillars. Amamiya Rin set down the grimoire and slipped behind a different pillar. Footsteps echoed through the empty fourth floor, drawing steadily closer. When they stopped, the crisp sound of metal implements being touched rang out, followed by the rustle of fabric, someone rearranging those strange devices. Amamiya Rin held his breath and cautiously peered around the edge of the pillar, exposing the barest sliver of his line of sight. In the wavering candlelight stood a woman. Her back was toward him, but he could see she wore her chestnut-brown hair long, topped with a light tan beret. Her coat was pale gray. From his angle, he could make out the fair skin of her profile, and a pair of orange lens glasses. Amamiya Rin had specifically studied photographs of Kawahara Miyuki beforehand. Even with only a side view, he recognized her instantly. The woman was none other than Kawahara Miyuki, the nation's sweetheart idol. Beyond Kawahara Miyuki, slumped at her feet, was a young girl, eyes shut, apparently unconscious. Was that today's victim? Amamiya Rin's gaze sharpened. His body relaxed. Moving in perfect silence, he slipped out from behind the pillar, and used the shadows cast by the load-bearing columns as cover, circling around toward Kawahara Miyuki's blind side. At that moment, Kawahara Miyuki was bending down to drag the girl up, preparing to stuff her into the Iron Maiden. Her movements abruptly halted. She spun around sharply, and her gaze locked directly onto Amamiya Rin's eyes with unerring precision. Who's there? The words had barely left her mouth when Kawahara Miyuki's eyes widened slightly, a flash of dazzled admiration crossing them. But that admiration curdled almost immediately into something ugly. Envy. Give me all your blood. I am the most beautiful. Give me your beauty, give it to me. The words came out as a shriek. The muscles of Kawahara Miyuki's face began to spasm. Her skin turned ashen gray, her cheekbones pushed high, her nose bridge collapsed, her mouth stretched wide to either side, her ears elongated upward into sharp points, and her eyes lost all trace of dark pupils, swallowed entirely by a blazing, blood-red light. Like a beast that had forgotten all reason, Kawahara Miyuki launched herself savagely at Amamiya Rin, at a speed that shattered any human limit. Amamiya Rin's pupils contracted. In the span of a single breath, he activated his sympathetic nervous system in a flash, concentration spiking to its absolute peak. The world slowed in his perception. In the sunlight streaming through the windows, every drifting mote of dust, every flicker of the candle flame, became crisp and distinct. Kawahara Miyuki's movements seemed to be running at half speed. Amamiya Rin retreated rapidly, simultaneously throwing himself back. Those razor-sharp claws raked past the tip of his nose in a rush of fetid air, the jagged nails missing his skin by a hair's breadth. Shrike! The front of his coat was torn open, a strip of fabric fluttering to the ground. No blood drawn, but the ferocity of those claws left a crawling chill across his skin. He used the momentum of his lean to roll into a back handspring, and by the time his feet touched the ground he had opened 3 meters of distance. But Kawahara Miyuki was on him like a shadow, shrieking as she lunged again, both claws slashing in rapid, unrelenting succession, wild and without technique, but dense as a storm. With no weapon in hand, Amamiya Rin had no choice but to pour everything into evasion. The razor-keen awareness granted by contemplative sight let him anticipate the trajectory of every strike before it landed. Half a step left, the claws grazed past his right shoulder and scored 3 shallow furrows into the load-bearing pillar behind him. Dodge right, duck low, the second strike swept over his head, sending a few severed strands of hair drifting down. Stop running. All you do is hide. Kawahara Miyuki's brow contorted into a rigid knot. A frenzied scream tore from her throat, her scarlet eyes trailing smears of afterimage through the dimness. Amamiya Rin did not retreat, he pressed forward. With a low, spinning step in, he slid into the blind spot of her attack, his shoulder and back gliding lightly past her spine. In the instant they crossed paths, he even had the composure to adjust his breathing rhythm. Hide. No, my real specialty is direct assault, though I'll admit, fighting without a weapon is inconvenient. Even as the words left him, Amamiya Rin drove a knife-hand strike at the back of Kawahara Miyuki's neck. But Kawahara Miyuki's body was far too solid. A clean blow to a vital point, and still she did not go down. She merely staggered half a step forward before wrenching herself around to face him. I'd normally love to let you reap what you've sown, but there's a victim here. I can't just let you devour this body at your leisure. Amamiya Rin stepped back a few paces, his gaze keen and appraising as he studied Kawahara Miyuki's face. A vampire. He was wearing Kawakami Tomi's body. Of all things, a vampire was what he feared least. Even if he went completely passive, he could still handle the vampire in front of him, but the victim over there appeared to still be alive. That approach was off the table. Miss Hayashi Naoko, what comes next is going to be a little unpleasant to watch. Would you mind looking away? Amamiya Rin called out without turning his head, addressing Hayashi Naoko where she was hiding behind the other load-bearing pillar. Hayashi Naoko said nothing. Instead, it was Kawahara Miyuki before him who paused, her gaze flickering, a look of visible inner struggle surfacing on her face. Ghost Fire P. Walnut-chan Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Samsara Game, starting with Shirogane K. Help us hit our targets. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals +1 free chapter for all. Chapter 114, I am the bone of my sword. 1,469 words. Amamiya Rin concentrated his will and through contemplative sight, turned his perception inward, away from the external world and into himself. Under the force of that fierce, unyielding intent, the regions of his cerebral cortex surged into extraordinary activity. Command after command traveled from his brain along invisible pathways, threading through his body. SHHK. With a skin-crawling tear, a tremendous force ripped outward from within, the skin at the back of Amamiya Rin's neck split violently open from the inside, and blood geysered out, staining his pale throat a vivid crimson. Then, slick with viscous blood and ragged fragments of soft tissue, a section of vertebra thrust out through the rupture like some alien plant breaking through soil. Amamiya Rin's body shook violently with the extremity of the pain, and yet his movements held not a single beat of hesitation. He reached back with one arm, curled 5 fingers around that exposed vertebra, and wrenched free an entire segment of spinal column, ribs still attached, tearing it bodily from his own back. In an instant, blood cascaded down Amamiya Rin's back like a waterfall. Kawahara Miyuki, who had been closing in for the kill, lurched to a dead stop. The sight had simply frozen her. Those eyes, glowing red, stared at Amamiya Rin, at the man who had just pulled a section of his own spine out with his bare hands. She drew a sharp, involuntary breath. Some deep, instinctive awe made her body take an unconscious half-step back. The extracted spinal segment seemed to come alive in Amamiya Rin's grip. The bone proliferated, warped, fractured, and stacked upon itself at a frantic pace. The individual vertebral structures elongated with a hideous scraping screech. The transverse and spinous processes on either side folded inward under pressure, compacting together into crude but razor-sharp blade edges. In the span of a few breaths, a grotesque bone blade had taken shape, forged from his own spinal column. It was bone-white throughout, its surface laced with irregular crimson veining. The blade retained the natural arc of the skeleton, and its edge was jagged and uneven, yet it radiated a raw, bloody sense of lethality. Amamiya Rin gripped the spine sword born from his own body, slowly raised his head, and fixed his gaze on Kawahara Miyuki, who stood frozen by the horror of what she had just witnessed. His eyes were calm. Terrifyingly calm. Behind him, the monstrous wound was already reacting. Muscle tissue writhed and crawled at the edges of the rupture as Tomi's regenerative power kicked in, struggling to stanch the bleeding and seal the wound. But the wound was too large. In the short term, that ghastly gaping gash would not fully close, a visceral reminder of the savage price paid for this bone blade. Round 2. Let's begin. Amamiya Rin leveled the bone blade at Kawahara Miyuki, and a smile touched his face, one edged with a flash of madness. The monstrous scene had stunned her, but a vampire's instinct quickly overwhelmed the shock. She let out a piercing, inhuman shriek and lunged again, faster this time, both claws driving straight for Amamiya Rin's face. The bone blade screamed up to meet her. Clang! Bone edge struck claw. The collision rang out with the dull, heavy sound of metal on stone, even throwing a few sparks. Amamiya Rin felt his arm sink under the impact. Kawahara Miyuki's strength was staggering. In this newborn body, Kawakami Tomi's body, trading raw force for raw force was a losing proposition, no question. But he had no intention of trading raw force. With a flick of his wrist, Amamiya Rin caught the momentum of her claw strike with the flat of the bone blade and redirected it sideways, bleeding off most of the force. At the same time, his footwork shifted, his body flowing like water around to Kawahara Miyuki's left. She snarled and lunged at him again. Amamiya Rin simply half-stepped back and turned sideways, the bone blade angled in front of him at a precise, subtle angle. The claws came raking through with a rush of foul wind and met only the flat of the blade, their force guided cleanly to the side, slicing empty air with a hollow whoosh. Kawahara Miyuki pressed the assault without pause. Her twin claws blurred into afterimages, the fiery glow in her eyes deepened to blood red, without a shred of wavering, only the pure, unhinged madness of something that had shed its reason entirely. Amamiya Rin moved like a swift in a storm. The bone blade touched, deflected, guided, parried, appearing at precisely the right point along each claw's path every single time. Through footwork and blade angle he funneled the fury of each attack, neutralizing it with the minimum of effort and motion. His breathing was even. His gaze was still. Step by step, he drew Kawahara Miyuki toward a load-bearing pillar. When she hurled herself at him again, Amamiya Rin drove off with his legs, his body spinning, and vanished into her blind spot. By the time Kawahara Miyuki whipped her head around searching for him, Amamiya Rin had already circled the pillar and reappeared behind her. Watching her back, Amamiya Rin's eyes sharpened. In an instant, the blade intent shifted, defense dissolved into offense. Marvelous sword. The bone blade thrust straight for the center of Kawahara Miyuki's back. Every hair on her body stood on end, by pure reflex, she twisted to block. At the precise moment her arm was about to intercept the blade, Amamiya Rin's wrist gave an almost imperceptible twitch. The bone blade traced a strange arc and changed from a thrust into a draw slash, the keen edge glanced along her ribs, raising a line of blood beads. The pain made Kawahara Miyuki seize up, a brief, stuttering hesitation in her movement. Amamiya Rin seized that fleeting opening, and changed the blade once more. The bone blade did not pull back. Instead, it rode the lingering momentum of the draw slash downward, the spine pressing flat like a weighted iron ruler, hammering down onto her arm just as it rose to guard. The force struck directly into the nerve cluster, and her arm juddered. Strike, redirect, press, 3 layers stacked in sequence. Kawahara Miyuki's rhythm shattered completely. Amamiya Rin surged forward, pressing his advantage. His feet moved swift as wind, the pale bone blade cut through the dim air in trailing afterimages, hewing toward Kawahara Miyuki in an unbroken, relentless chain. Each cut was precisely placed, without a wasted ounce of force, sealing off her escape routes, striking at vital points. Kawahara Miyuki was driven back step after step, battered and reeling, her guard wide open. No conscious thought was needed. Pure battle instinct drove Amamiya Rin's next thrust. Evil thrust. The bone blade, coiled and patient as a serpent in the grass, struck from stillness into motion, finding the right shoulder joint, fully exposed by her forward lean, and plunging in with sudden, merciless force. The blow carried no flourish, no complexity, a single, clean thrust that drove the bone blade's tip hard into the gap of Kawahara Miyuki's right shoulder joint. At the same moment, his footwork followed through, using the forward momentum of his body to wrench her already unbalanced frame sideways. Kawahara Miyuki crashed hard to the floor. Amamiya Rin yanked the bone blade free, took it in both hands, and drove it down into her left shoulder, the tip punching savagely into the joint, destroying that arm as well. Ha! Amamiya Rin let out a long, slow exhale. Somewhere along the way, a look of profound, unguarded satisfaction had spread across his face. For so long he had been helpless, a cripple stumbling from one world-ending horror to the next. But today, at last, he had run into a third-rate threat, a mere vampire, and after one proper fight all the pressure that had built up inside him came pouring out. His confidence came flooding back. Kawahara Miyuki was still struggling. Animal growls clawed up out of her throat, the veins in her neck stood out in sharp relief as she thrashed and writhed. Stop moving. Stay still. I still have things to ask you. I'll decide what to do with you based on your answers. Amamiya Rin pressed his knee onto Kawahara Miyuki's chest, his left hand clamping down hard on her forehead, pinning her head to the floor. But Kawahara Miyuki had lost all reason. Her legs kicked and flailed wildly. Amamiya Rin could only bear down harder, until she could not break free. Ghost Fire plus 40 ch, Walnut Chan Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Samsara Game, starting with Shirogane K. Let's achieve our community goals. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals plus 1 extra chapter for everybody. Chapter 115, Disposition of the Culprit. 1,418 words. At that moment, the girl Kawahara Miyuki had dragged to the floor beside them stirred. She slowly opened her eyes, blinking in brief confusion, and then she saw what lay before her, Amamiya Rin, pinning down a creature with the face of a bat. It should have looked like a scene of a monster being vanquished. To the girl, it looked like something else entirely. Amamiya Rin had his back to her. The back of his shirt was torn open in a great ragged gash, and the exposed skin beneath was streaked with blood. A brutal wound ran almost clean across the nape of his neck, and from within that wound, several small, fleshy nodules had pushed their way out. Each nodule was no larger than an infant's fist. You could just barely make out the blurred suggestion of facial features on them, like unfinished heads, dangling there, swaying faintly with every movement Amamiya Rin made. The girl's eyes went wide. Her mouth fell open. Before she could make a sound, her eyes rolled back and she passed out again. Amamiya Rin had no attention to spare for her. Every scrap of his focus was consumed by holding Kawahara Miyuki down. He had nothing left over to deal with the Tomi embryos sprouting from his back. Even so, under his suppression, Kawahara Miyuki's struggling gradually weakened. The bat-like face dissolved back into her beautiful features, and the crimson in her eyes slowly faded. Kawahara Miyuki lay on her back in the dust, her gaze drifting back into focus, a tangled, anguished expression settling across her face. Sensing that she had recovered her senses, Amamiya Rin released her. He yanked the bone knife from his left shoulder, reversed his grip, and flung it behind him in one clean motion. The blade swept across the nape of his neck. A few soft sounds, and the nodules hanging from his back dropped away, hitting the dust-caked concrete floor. The moment they landed, they began to scream. It was Kawakami Tomi's voice, all of them, shrieking and hurling a torrent of vicious, cutting words at Amamiya Rin. Faced with these newborn Tomis, Amamiya Rin let out a tired sigh and opted for the simplest solution. He opened his mouth. Cold light flickered and dozens of tendrils shot out from within, their needle-tipped ends driving straight into the oral cavities of each tiny Tomi, connecting with their cranial nerves. He folded them into the Tomi network. Brute force. Problem solved. He turned back to Kawahara Miyuki. In the short window he had given her, she had clearly pieced together enough to understand the situation. Amamiya Rin looked down at her from where he stood and asked, calm and even. "Back with us? I'm hoping you're capable of a normal conversation now. I'm the one who committed all those murders, aren't I?" Kawahara Miyuki's voice was lovely even now. The words, though, were soaked in bitterness. She phrased it like a question, but her tone made clear she already knew the answer. "I didn't witness you killing anyone with my own eyes," Amamiya Rin said, his voice quiet and heavy, "but everything here points to you." He let a trace of sorrow show in his gaze. He didn't believe a 20-year-old idol at the height of her fame would kill for blood out of some vanity-driven desire for eternal youth. In all likelihood, she had suffered psychic contamination. That kind of thing was far from rare in Junji Ito's world. But regardless of contamination or not, the blood of innocent people stained Kawahara Miyuki's hands, her entire body, really. "I'd been suspicious for a long time," she said. "My dressing room kept getting wrecked. A knife kept appearing in my bag out of nowhere. I always had this creeping feeling of being watched. But every time I asked anyone about it, they told me it was normal, that it was par for the course when you were an idol. I believed them until that day." Kawahara Miyuki's face drained of color. Remorse spread across her features. "I was passing through Shimokitazawa when this overwhelming feeling hit me. My vision went black. My mind went blank, like I'd fallen into a void, no sense of reality at all. When I came back to myself, I was standing in a dim alleyway. And I saw her. She was killing someone, peeling the skin off a woman, splitting her open. She had this hideous, savage face. She looked up at me and said her name was Hattori Arisa." Kawahara Miyuki's voice dropped to almost nothing. "That was my real name. I should have realized it then. I wasn't witnessing a murder. I was committing one. But I was so lost in that fog, I couldn't hold on to the memory of killing. My own mind had deceived me. I told myself I had only stumbled onto a crime scene." Kawahara Miyuki murmured it like a prayer, afraid to draw too close to the truth, but the truth had come to stand before her anyway. "What happened to you?" Amamiya Rin pressed. "Do you remember what you experienced in this building the very first time? That paranormal program, what exactly occurred?" Kawahara Miyuki's gaze grew distant. She reached back through her memory and spoke quietly. "That episode was a vampire special. The production team had found all of this somewhere, I don't know how. Even then, standing there, I felt like the figure in the painting was looking at me." Her eyes drifted across the Iron Maiden and the portrait hanging on the wall. "After the shoot ended, I took that book home with me. I don't even know why, it was like something compelled me. I had it translated later. It was written in Latin. It was a diary belonging to the famous Blood Countess, Elizabeth Bathory. It contained the dark ritual she performed, bathing in the blood of young girls." She shook her head hard, a look of bewildered helplessness crossing her face. "After that, I can't remember clearly anymore. It was like one long, endless nightmare. For stretches of time, it felt like my body was being operated by something else." "These production crews," Amamiya Rin murmured, unable to stop himself. have a talent for stumbling onto exactly the things they should never touch. Then, even so, whatever the circumstances, you have to answer for what you've done. He held her gaze. Kawahara Miyuki held his in return. The eyes that had once blazed beneath stage lights were dark now, utterly without luster. She pulled her lips into a bitter smile. Tears slipped soundlessly from the corners of her eyes. I know. From the moment I came back to myself, I knew it would end like this. Whatever you decide to do with me, I'll accept it. Amamiya Rin folded his arms and considered. Kawahara Miyuki was a victim too. Killing her outright wouldn't do, and folding her into the Hitomi network was equally out of the question. A case like this, it was best handed off to Induranko's police history compilation office. His main body could handle the formal handoff. There would even be a reward in it. Stay here for now. Someone will come for you. Decision made, Amamiya Rin stripped off Kawahara Miyuki's outer jacket, used it to bind her legs, then stood and pulled the portrait down from the wall. He called out toward where Hayashi Naoko had been hiding behind a load-bearing pillar. Ms. Hayashi Naoko, please come out. I need to speak with you. His words echoed through the hollow floor and died there. No response came from where Hayashi Naoko was hiding. Amamiya Rin raised an eyebrow, and had just started toward her when Kawahara Miyuki shuddered from head to toe, snapping her head up. Shock rang through her voice. Hayashi Naoko. Amamiya Rin looked back at her. That's right. Your makeup artist. She witnessed one of your crime scenes. She's the one who brought me here. That's impossible. Kawahara Miyuki cut him off. She's been missing for 2 months. The day before she disappeared, that was one of the gaps. One of the stretches of time I can't remember. Ghost Fire Walnut-chan Winky Face Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Ashi no Ko, co-starring with Kana Rima. Help smash these goals. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals +1 bonus chapter for everyone. Chapter 116, Amino Maria. 1,446 words. The voice cut off abruptly. Amamiya Rin's expression changed. Without hesitation, he crossed the room in a few quick strides and rounded the massive concrete pillar. The corner was empty. Only a thick layer of dust had settled on the floor, no footprints, no trace of Hayashi Naoko. Amamiya Rin raised his head and swept his gaze across the surroundings. It was the same everywhere. No sign of Hayashi Naoko anywhere, not even a footprint. Only his own and Kawahara Miyuki's marks remained in the dust. A ghost. A ghost? The realization hit Amamiya Rin all at once. Hayashi Naoko had almost certainly been one of the serial killer's victims. And the legend of spirits appearing to the living to voice their grievances, that was a story as old as time. A ghost, you're saying it was Hayashi Naoko's ghost that brought you here? That she? She never found peace, and she's been watching over me all this time. Kawahara Miyuki stared blankly up at the gray, dust-filmed ceiling, murmuring to herself, her voice trembling with unmistakable, genuine grief. Most likely. She's been watching over you all this time, but now, at last, she can find peace. Amamiya Rin pressed his palms together and bowed in the direction of the Iron Maiden. Barring some unforeseen twist, Hayashi Naoko had also been sealed inside the Iron Maiden by Kawahara Miyuki, tortured to death. What a tragedy. And they had been such close friends. The words struck Kawahara Miyuki like a blow. Her body gave a violent shudder, as though those final walls around her heart had crumbled all at once. Naoko. Naoko. She repeated her friend's name over and over, unconsciously, her whole body racked with trembling. She curled in on herself and broke down completely, sobbing and heaving, uncontrollable wails. Naoko. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Kawahara Miyuki's cries echoed through the vast, empty floor, saturated with despair and remorse. Amamiya Rin watched her in silence and said nothing to comfort her. Some sins cannot be washed away by tears. He let out a quiet sigh, shook his head, and picked up the portrait of Elizabeth and the old tome. Then, with some effort, he hoisted the unconscious girl under his arm. His gaze drifted to the cluster of Tomi tumors that had not yet grown themselves bodies. Carrying all of this downstairs wasn't exactly realistic. Amamiya Rin thought for a moment. Then he walked over to the tumors and, using the tip of his foot, flicked them up one by one and punted them toward the window, like kicking footballs. His aim turned out to be surprisingly decent. The Tomis traced elegant arcs through the air and sailed cleanly through the window, dropping out of sight. Baka. Amamiya Rin, you bastard. I will never forgive you. I'll kill you, I absolutely will. The tumors vanished from view, but inside Amamiya Rin's head an explosion went off, the newborn Tomis bombarding him with a torrent of curses. You can't die from that anyway. What are you making such a fuss about? Amamiya Rin shrugged and paid them no mind. He tucked the portrait and the book under one arm, half carried and half dragged the unconscious girl with the other, and headed for the stairwell. The girl's head lolled limply with each step he took going down. From upstairs, the sound of Kawahara Miyuki's sobbing drifted faintly after him, echoing through the hollow stairwell in long, mournful reverberations. Whether it was the crying or the jolting of the descent, the girl stirred. A soft, barely audible moan escaped her lips. Her eyelids fluttered and slowly opened, her gaze at first carrying the haze of someone just waking, drifting unfocused to what was nearest, the rough, unfinished edge of a concrete step. She blinked. Awareness crept back in by degrees. She turned her neck and froze. A face filled her vision. Snow-white skin. A few strands of ink-black hair had slipped loose and curled against one cheek. Features too exquisite to belong to any real person. And yet, the brows and eyes carried something the rest of the face did not, a sharp, clean boldness, entirely at odds with that delicate exterior. Those beautiful eyes held a clarity and a quiet resolve that could only come from having weathered a great deal. Two utterly contradictory qualities, fused together on one face, forming an attraction that was deeply strange and utterly impossible to look away from. She found herself staring, slightly dazed. Amamiya Rin sensed the movement in the crook of his arm. He tilted his head down slightly and met her gaze, hazy, and a little transfixed. Awake? He spoke. The voice passed through Tomi's throat, sweet and alluring, with a thread of natural crispness beneath, and a calm, measured tone that carried an understated note of concern. Am I dreaming? The girl murmured. It felt like she had been having a strange dream. First, a bat-faced woman had knocked her out of nowhere. Then she'd woken up to a scene of grotesque, nightmarish horror, and been so terrified she'd blacked out again. And now, coming to a second time, she found herself looking up at a face of beauty that seemed to transcend gender entirely. A dream? Definitely not. You were attacked. I happened to be passing by and found you by chance. I followed the trail and pulled you out. Can you stand? Amamiya Rin stopped walking and addressed the girl in his arms. She came back to herself then. Her cheeks flushed warm. She hurriedly stepped back, steadying herself with Amamiya Rin's support as she found her footing. She pressed her fingers against her temple, still slightly dizzy, and her muddled thoughts gradually began to clear. If this isn't a dream, then the attack, right, there was someone strange. The terrifying images from moments ago flickered through her mind. The crying drifting in from upstairs made her scalp prickle. The bat-like woman. The flesh tumors shaped like human heads. Had all of that actually been real? The girl couldn't suppress a shudder. She was a person with a very unusual appearance. She was almost certainly the perpetrator behind the serial killings of these past few months, but it's over now. I've subdued her and contacted the police. In a few days, you'll probably see the news of the killer's arrest on television. Amamiya Rin had no intention of telling the girl the truth. In this world, the more you knew, the more danger you were in. Serial killings? The girl asked, bewildered. You haven't heard? There have been a string of murders over the past several months. Many young women have fallen victim. Amamiya Rin turned to look at her, mildly puzzled. Even he, someone who spent most of his time in a hospital, knew about this case. But this girl, who looked barely old enough to be in high school, had no idea. Wasn't anyone at school talking about it? I only arrived in Tokyo today. My father's job was transferred here, so I haven't had a chance to learn much about what's been happening in the city. The girl hurried to explain. I see. Amamiya Rin nodded. Right, thank you so very much for saving me. My name is Amino Maria. I'm about to start attending Tensei Academy in Setagaya Ward. As she said it, she snapped to attention and bowed deeply toward Amamiya Rin, her long hair spilling forward with the motion. Amamiya Rin watched her, flustered yet doing her best to stay polite, and gave a casual wave of his hand. No need for all that formality. My name is... He instinctively moved to give a name, but the words caught in his throat. Neither his own name nor Kawakami Tomi's were exactly safe to hand out freely. But then again, if this girl only moved around within Tokyo, it should be fine. Any Tomis not belonging to the Tomi network had already fled outside the Tokyo area. My name is Kawakami Tomi. I have a few sisters with rather poor temperaments who look exactly like me. If you ever run into them and find yourself in danger, you can turn to them for help, but don't count on them having any particular goodwill toward you. After a moment's thought, Amamiya Rin settled on a name after all. Ghost Fire Seek, Walnut-chan Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Ashi no Ko, co-starring with Kana Rima. Let's hit these goals. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals 1 extra chapter for the public. Chapter 117, Tomi's Ambition. 1,324 words. What, really? Amino Maria's eyes went wide with surprise. What is it? Amamiya Rin looked at her, puzzled. Someone as beautiful as you, and there are actually several of them. That's unbelievable. Amino Maria said it with complete sincerity, gazing up at Amamiya Rin's face, her eyes full of wistful admiration. Amamiya Rin gave a non-committal sound, and offered her a word of caution instead. In nature, the more beautiful something is, the more dangerous it tends to be. Though of course, things that are hideous beyond reason aren't exactly safe either. Mid-sentence, he thought of the female model and added that last part. Amino Maria had no idea what he meant, but nodded along vaguely. Amamiya Rin said nothing more. He turned and continued down the stairs. Amino Maria followed behind him, and on an instinct glanced at the back of Amamiya Rin's neck. His nape was smeared with traces of blood, but the skin itself was completely unmarked, smooth and unblemished, without a single wound. The sight triggered a memory, the horrifying image she had seen just before losing consciousness, those human-headed tumors, growing from Amamiya Rin's back. She pushed the thought aside. She must have been half delirious from the shock of waking up. She'd seen wrong. Rin, that old book and the portrait. What are you planning to do with them? While Amino Maria was studying the back of Amamiya Rin's neck, a thought from Kawakami Tomi rippled through the Tomi network and surfaced inside Amamiya Rin's mind. He recognized it immediately. This was the Tomi who had gone all the way to the rural distillery. Study them first. Figure out what we're actually dealing with. If it can be handled, handle it. If it can't, we seal it away. Amamiya Rin answered evenly. Kawahara Miyuki had seemed to reveal a great deal, but she herself was operating in the dark. She knew very little about the Elizabeth portrait and the diary. Still, Amamiya Rin's working theory was that whatever black magic ritual was recorded in that portrait and diary belonged to the same category as the one Aizawa Yuma had used to summon the apology demon. A ritual of summoning, in this case, summoning Elizabeth herself to obtain some manner of special power. It was worth running an experiment when the chance arose, just to see what would happen. Leave it to me. Keep the portrait for me, I'm heading back to Tokyo tomorrow. I'll test it for you. Kawakami Tomi said it at once. Oh? Since when are you this generous? Amamiya Rin raised an eyebrow, the faintest smile touching the corner of his mouth. I couldn't care less about testing anything. I want to become a vampire, then burn the portrait to ash, and be the one and only singular Kawakami Tomi. Thoughts flowed freely through the Tomi network, no one could hide anything from anyone. Kawakami Tomi had exposed herself completely. Far away in the mountain valley town outside Nagoya, flames were climbing inside the distillery workshop. All 20 fermentation vats had been set alight by the matchsticks Kawakami Tomi had thrown in, each one now a roaring torch. A cloying, sweet stench mingled with the acrid smell of scorching wood and filled the air. The loading workers and the company president's family were moving through the building setting more fires. Some dragged the unconscious workers and security guards to safety at a distance, others sloshed the finished Tomi brew across the workshop walls. Their eyes were glazed and rapt, every shred of their will surrendered to the Tomi larva nestled inside their minds. Kawakami Tomi stood at the distillery's main gate, one shoulder propped against the doorframe, arms folded across her chest, eyes glittering. The inferno steadily consuming both workshops flared and dimmed in her gaze. Unlike the fakes who just stand still and rot, I'm moving forward. I'm growing. It'll be me who defines what Kawakami Tomi truly is. She was done being what she was. Kawakami Tomi had found her ambition. She could scream all she liked that every other Tomi was a counterfeit. It didn't change the reality. Every single Kawakami Tomi was identical. If she wanted to change that. If she wanted to seize the kind of power needed to destroy her natural enemy. Then why stop at one change? Why not go further? Setting herself apart from every other Tomi. Reclassifying every other Tomi as an enemy to be eliminated, for a Kawakami Tomi, that was simply the logical conclusion. The sheer volume of unprecedented upheaval in recent days had kept the Tomis inside the Tomi network from turning on each other. Until the apology demon was destroyed, mutual slaughter remained off the table. But that didn't mean she couldn't start preparing for her future right now. Ha ha ha. Bold words from a counterfeit. A mere fake dares talk about defining what Kawakami Tomi is. What kind of nonsense is that? Turning into some bat monster counts as growth. And don't forget, we're immortal. Even burning doesn't kill us anymore. Idiot. You're in Nagoya. I'm in Tokyo. Even if you become a vampire and burn the portrait, I'll get there first. One stone, 1,000 ripples. Every Tomi harbored the same secret desire, to eliminate all the other counterfeits and be the last one standing, and they all knew it about each other. The relationship between Tomi and Tomi was far more vicious than anything between them and Amamiya Rin. But under the pressure of their circumstances, none of them had ever said it out loud, until one Tomi let the thought slip, and blew the lid off every other one in the process. Humph. Then we'll see, won't we? The flesh may be undying, but the mind is what truly prevails. Kawakami Tomi fired back, and in doing so exposed herself all over again. There was only one factor that would decide which of them ultimately won, the mind. Kala's true nature was unity, one will, one consciousness. But the mutual antipathy between the Tomis, combined with Amamiya Rin's inherently male mode of thought and his formidable willpower, had warped that unity into the Tomi network. Yet if one Kawakami Tomi's mind could overpower all the others, the Tomi network would naturally revert to its original form. Feeling Kawakami Tomi's intent, the rest of the Tomis burst out laughing. Kawakami Tomi's reasoning was sound, but not one of them believed for a single moment that herself was stronger than theirs. Rin, the distillery problem is handled. Leave the portrait and the old book for me. Kawakami Tomi understood her counterparts perfectly well, and had no interest in wasting energy arguing with herself. She turned directly to Amamiya Rin with her demand. Okay. Amamiya Rin didn't refuse. Kawakami Tomi had done the work, put in the effort, and she was the first to ask for the portrait and the book. There was no reason to hand them to someone else. The other Tomis knew his character well enough not to argue. The one who'd called her an idiot had just been venting hot air. Meanwhile, Amamiya Rin and Amino Maria had emerged from the abandoned building. At Amino Maria's earnest request, the two of them exchanged phone numbers. After seeing her off, Amamiya Rin let his consciousness retreat back into his main body. The gym door swung shut behind him. The evening breeze drifted across his face, cool and light, cutting through the fog of exhaustion that had settled over his mind. He leaned on his cane and shuffled painfully forward, made his way to the jeep, pulled the door open, and collapsed inside. Ghost Fire P, Walnut Chan Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Samsara Game, starting with Shirogane K. Help us hit our targets. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals +1 free chapter for all. Chapter 118, The Girl Searching for Hair Gel. 1,343 words. God, that wiped me out, but I should have come sooner. Amamiya Rin lay slumped in his seat, muttering to himself. Triple compression had left him wrecked, even after half an hour's rest. His whole body still ached with a dull, pervasive misery. But when he turned his awareness inward, the picture was encouraging. Atrophied muscles, adhesed joints, both had improved dramatically. A single session under compression had stimulated his body at least as much as 3 full days of rehabilitation. And that was just the incidental benefit. The real purpose of the compression was physical fortification. Amamiya Rin could feel it: skin, flesh, sinew, bone, lungs, heart, all of it had taken a measurable step forward. Even the cultivation techniques in those over-the-top fantasy novels probably couldn't match this. He lay there a while longer, then turned his head to look at the passenger seat. Elizabeth's portrait and diary sat there, and behind them, a wicked bone knife, everything he'd had Tomi retrieve for him earlier. The portrait and diary were for the other Kawakami Tomi. The bone knife, once ground down a little, could serve as a real blade. He gathered himself, started the car, and headed straight for the abandoned building. He cut the engine, got out, and walked inside under his own power. Up to the 4th floor. He leaned against the doorframe and glanced in. Kawahara Miyuki was still curled up where she'd been, motionless, apparently having lost consciousness. Amamiya Rin wasn't certain, and he didn't particularly care to verify it. Knowing she was still there was enough. He turned and headed back downstairs, fishing out his phone and scrolling to Kazumi Junia's number. Hello. Amamiya-kun. It's me. I'll keep it short. I've found the perpetrator behind the serial murders. Amamiya Rin gave a slightly edited account of events, an anonymous text, a tip-off, having Kawakami Tomi investigate on his behalf, and confirming that the real killer behind the serial murders was none other than Kawahara Miyuki. Impossible. Don't talk nonsense. How could Miyuki be a murderer? The roar was so loud it made Amamiya Rin's ears ring. Someone had yanked the phone away from Kazumi Junya, and was now bellowing at him. And you are? Amamiya Rin didn't recognize the voice. He asked carefully. I'm Kogure. That's not important. What's important is that Miyuki could never murder anyone. I won't allow you to slander her. The man on the other end of the line screamed. Good grief, another obsessive fan. Amamiya Rin found it faintly funny, but he didn't let it bother him. He simply said, whether it was slander or not, come and see for yourself. About 20 minutes later, a police car pulled up and stopped a short distance away. The door opened. Kazumi Junya stepped out first, his expression grim. Right behind him came Kogure Soichiro, brow furrowed, lips pressed into a tight line, the look he trained on Amamiya Rin heavy with undisguised distrust and seething resentment. She's on the 4th floor. The physical evidence is up there too. Amamiya Rin didn't wait for questions. He jerked his thumb over his shoulder at the building behind him. In the name of Miyuki Fan Club member number 0023, I will not allow anyone to slander Miyuki. Kogure Soichiro shot Amamiya Rin a withering glare, then charged inside without another word. His footsteps boomed through the hollow stairwell. Sorry about that. I only just found out myself. Kogure is apparently a Kawahara Miyuki fan. Kazumi Junya walked over to Amamiya Rin and gave a helpless laugh. Still, that Kawahara Miyuki, a national idol, turning out to be the killer behind a string of murders. I don't think anyone could have seen that coming. Kazumi Junya's smile faded, replaced by a look that was equal parts weary and bemused. Can't they just ban these paranormal shows? None of this would have happened if it weren't for those programs. Amamiya Rin leaned back against the car door and couldn't help venting. If only it were that simple. Ban the shows and you still can't stop enthusiasts from going out and exploring on their own. Kazumi Junya shook his head, and with no further small talk, strode into the abandoned building. Amamiya Rin didn't follow, his mobility made it impractical. A few minutes later, he watched as the hulking figure of Kogure Soichiro emerged from the building in a daze. His face was a picture of misery, those broad shoulders drooping as he shuffled out, mumbling over and over, "How could this happen? Miyuki, that damned Elizabeth." Kazumi Junya came out behind him, escorting Kawahara Miyuki. His face had gone rather pale, the look of a man who had seen something deeply disturbing. In his right hand he held a clear evidence bag containing a fruit knife, its blade smeared with blood. Kawahara Miyuki walked with her head down, and her hands behind her back, secured in a pair of gleaming handcuffs. Amamiya Rin accompanied them to the Metropolitan Police Department and gave an official statement. The process went smoothly enough, though there was no Katsudon, and no chance to slip into the police history compilation office and look through its files. A case this big, a national celebrity, a serial murder charge, had the entire department buzzing. He caught a glimpse of Professor Matsuura on his way out, but didn't want to interrupt anyone's work. He gave a brief wave from a distance and left. It was nearly 7 o'clock by now. The sky had gone a flat, featureless gray, the sun had long since vanished. Amamiya Rin let out a quiet breath, climbed back into his second-hand jeep, and drove toward Shimokitazawa. The day wasn't done yet. The flesh-colored monster still needed to be dealt with, and the thoroughly unhinged mother needed to be put behind bars. He parked in a paid lot in Shimokitazawa, locked the car, shouldered his sword bag, and set off with his cane. Walking along, Amamiya Rin scanned the street signs out of habit. He passed a 24-hour convenience store, and his pace slowed. His stomach registered a quiet complaint. He'd spent the whole afternoon under the compression rack. He hadn't done much in the way of movement, but all that strain had been enough to work up a mild hunger. Might as well grab something to take the edge off. The thought was barely formed before he was already heading for the store. He pushed the door open. Cool air rushed out, carrying with it the savory smell of Odin. Amamiya Rin glanced at the Odin pot on the counter, tempting, but eating while walking on a cane was more trouble than it was worth, so he let it go. He made his way through the aisles, picked out a sandwich and a carton of strawberry milk, and headed back to the register. The cashier was in the middle of scanning his items when the door opened again. A girl of about 10 came running in, leaned over the counter, and called out, "Excuse me, do you have hair cream?" The cashier didn't miss a beat, scanning the sandwich barcode as he answered, "Hair cream? No, we don't carry that anymore. Nobody really sells it these days, everyone uses spray now." The girl said, "Oh," looked disappointed, turned on her heel, and ran back out. Amamiya Rin paid, pocketed his change, tore open the sandwich wrapper, and pushed the straw into the strawberry milk carton, then walked out of the convenience store. He took a large bite and let his gaze drift across the street. The little girl who'd asked about hair cream was now huddled with 2 or 3 other girls about her age, clustered on the opposite pavement, discussing something among themselves. Ghost Fire Walnut Chan Winky Face Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Ashi no Ko, co-starring with Kana Rima. Help smash these goals. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals +1 bonus chapter for everyone. Chapter 119, visiting the alchemist family. 1,436 words. The clerk told me that most stores only sell hairspray these days. Hair cream is basically extinct. So what do we do? We've been out forever. We should head home. Come on, just a little longer. We walked all this way just to find out what hair cream was. Now we know. That's enough. But I still think having the real thing would be way more useful than just knowing the word. The girl's chatter drifted into his ears. Amamiya Rin took a bite of his sandwich and barely registered it at first. But that phrase, having the real thing is more useful than just knowing the word, made his chewing slow. That was an odd conversation. In his previous life, he would never have taken children's babbling seriously. But in a world where sinister curses lurked around every corner, who could say whether some dark script wasn't already in motion? Assuming kids had some kind of immunity was a rookie mistake. He took a sip of strawberry milk, swallowed the last of his sandwich, and cut across the side street toward the little group of girls. Hey there. Are you girls looking for hair cream? What do you need it for? Amamiya Rin asked in a casual, offhand tone. The girls turned to look at him, a flicker of wariness in their eyes, until they noticed the cane. Our teacher told us to. The girl who had gone into the convenience store answered. Your teacher? It drives monsters away. Another girl, her hair done up in pigtails, chimed in. Monsters? There's this weird woman. She's always hanging around outside our school, and one of our classmates got attacked. A weird woman. She wears a big coat and wraps a scarf around her face, and she runs faster than a car. She's definitely a monster. Teacher taught us a spell to scare her off. You just have to shout hair cream at her and she'll run away. The girls all talked over each other, and Amamiya Rin pieced together the full picture fairly quickly. Recently, in the Setagaya area, a mysterious woman had been prowling the streets every evening into the night. Word was that several children had been attacked, though none had been seriously hurt. The girls were convinced she was a monster. Their teacher had told them that if they were ever frightened by a monster, he happened to know a special charm to banish it. The word was hair cream. Wearing a heavy coat, face hidden by a scarf, attacks children but never actually kills anyone. Amamiya Rin turned it over in his mind. Could the strange woman the girls were describing be the skin-shedding mother from the flesh-colored horror? That woman wandered around every night in her overcoat like some deranged exhibitionist, accosting passers-by and tearing it open to bare herself completely. If the person she ambushed happened to be a monk practicing the white skeleton visualization, no harm done. But for any ordinary person who mistook it for a lucky encounter, one moment a seductive stranger, the next, a figure stripped of skin, nothing but raw red muscle, well. The shock alone might put a man out of commission for life. I'm not sure where you'd find hair cream these days, Amamiya Rin said, snapping back to the present. He looked at the girls and his expression grew serious. But if you're really afraid of that strange woman, the last thing you should be doing is wandering around out here. Going straight home after school beats any charm in the world. The dusk had deepened around them. Street lamps flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the pavement. The streets in the distance had already sunk into a heavy, murky dark. At this hour, even without any cursed urban legends, it was no time for children to be out roaming. The girls shrank a little under the weight of Amamiya Rin's stern tone, exchanging glances. Fine, mister. They answered with obvious reluctance, then shuffled off together in a grumbling cluster. Amamiya Rin watched until their silhouettes disappeared around the corner of the alley. He finished the last of his sandwich in a few quick bites and drained the strawberry milk, then turned and continued along the roadside toward the address teacher Takagi had given him. The sky grew darker by the minute. The glow of the street lamps looked thin and strained against the thickening night. Before long, Amamiya Rin stopped in front of a detached single-family house. The garden was planted with flowers and kept in tidy, careful order. He pressed the doorbell. A moment passed. The door opened. A woman in her mid-twenties appeared in the doorway, long hair falling loose over her shoulders, face pale, a quiet melancholy settled between her brows. She wasn't in Kawakami Tomi's league, but she was a beauty nonetheless. "Hello. Can I help you?" The woman looked at the unfamiliar man outside with mild confusion. "There's something I'd like to ask you about. Would it be all right if I came in?" Amamiya Rin studied the woman's face, and bearing carefully as he asked with courteous directness. The woman's confusion deepened. A stranger showing up unannounced and asking to come inside, she naturally had no intention of agreeing to that. Recently, there have been a series of attacks in this neighborhood. According to witnesses, the attacker is a woman in a heavy coat who keeps herself completely covered. Seeing that she had no intention of inviting him in, Amamiya Rin added that. At those words, the woman went rigid. The look she turned on Amamiya Rin was shot through with startled, wavering uncertainty. "May I come in now?" Amamiya Rin's gaze sharpened. He hadn't been entirely sure whether the address teacher Takagi had passed along was genuine, but this woman's reaction told him all he needed to know. He was in the right place. I don't know what you're talking about." The woman took a step back, one hand braced against the door as though ready to shut it in his face. Every inch of her radiated a lack of conviction. "Kawabi-san," Amamiya Rin said, glancing at the name on the door plate, and getting straight to the point. "I don't imagine you'd want anyone to find out that the strange woman who's been attacking people lately has something to do with the Kawabi household." "Ah." Kawabi Mayo flinched as though she'd been struck, and a strangled, desperate sound escaped her lips. "Please don't. I'll do anything you want." "Wait." The corner of Amamiya Rin's eye twitched. The words Kawabi Mayo had just said, paired with the look of pitiful desperation on her face, had produced an effect that was, to put it plainly, deeply inconvenient. "Don't make that face." Amamiya Rin let out a quiet sigh. His manner shifted, becoming earnest and grave, the air around him settling into something measured and sober. "I only want to understand certain things about the Kawabi family that aren't fit for public knowledge." "That's not exactly a conversation for the doorstep, is it?" Kawabi Mayo looked pained, but she stepped forward, unlatched the iron gate of the garden, and led Amamiya Rin inside. Once in the living room, Amamiya Rin set his cane to one side and settled onto the sofa. He glanced around, and spotted a small bald boy lurking in the corridor beyond, only his head poking out, watching them with quiet, furtive eyes. The child's skin was mottled with uneven patches, as though he suffered from some skin condition. Amamiya Rin knew better. It wasn't a disease. Those were the marks left by something viscous, like glue, being repeatedly applied and then torn away. Kawabi Mayo poured him a cup of barley tea, then sat down across from him, hands resting on her knees, fingers curled slightly inward, her expression still carrying traces of anxiety. "Please don't be nervous. I mean you no harm. As far as I know, Mrs. Kawabi has been sourcing all manner of unusual materials, and attempting to replicate an alchemy formula left behind by her late husband. Am I right?" Amamiya Rin lifted the teacup but made no move to drink from it. He looked directly at Kawabi Mayo, and came straight to the point. "Ghost Fire P, Walnut Chan Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Ashi no Ko, co-starring with Kana Rima. Help us hit our targets. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals plus 1 free chapter for all. Chapter 120, Filial Son. 1,524 words. Are you perhaps a friend of my brother-in-law?" When Amamiya Rin revealed what her sister had been doing and identified her brother-in-law by name, Kawabi Maya went instantly tense, her expression shifting to one of guarded suspicion. "No. I simply know of him." Amamiya Rin shook his head. "You were right just now, my sister has been obsessed with recreating my brother-in-law's alchemy formula. But there seem to be some errors or omissions in the formula, and she's never managed to get it right." Kawabi Maya looked at Amamiya Rin with a mixture of confusion and wariness as she added those careful words. Her eyes slid away from his as she spoke. Are there really errors in it? Or did you swap out the finished product yourself? Amamiya Rin smiled faintly and posed the question to her. Before the words had even fully left his mouth, the color had already drained from Kawabi Maya's face. Why would I do something like that? Please don't joke around. She forced a smile, but the shock in her eyes only deepened. She hadn't expected Amamiya Rin to know about this as well. Could it be, did this visitor already know that the so-called alchemy formula was actually a skin-stripping technique? Ah, of course. He had come to the Kawabi household, which meant he must have seen her sister's exposed musculature. And given how much he seemed to know about her brother-in-law, could he have already pieced together the whole story from beginning to end? Because you didn't want to go along with what your sister is doing. She's lost her mind, but you're still sane. Amamiya Rin held her gaze steadily, his eyes clear and direct. His memories of the flesh-colored monster were hazy, but he still recalled the broad strokes. The protagonist was a little boy named Ricky, whose mother had become utterly fixated on the allure of exposed musculature, determined to make Ricky see his own flesh beneath the skin. But Ricky and his aunt were both perfectly normal people with no interest in any of it, so the aunt had been playing along on the surface while quietly working against her sister all along. The tragedy was that the aunt had already been deceived into applying that ointment, which caused her skin and flesh to split apart, leaving her wearing her own hide like a garment. My sister, she's already lost it. I genuinely don't know what to do anymore. Kawabi Maya's eyes grew hot, and tears spilled down her face. She didn't have the courage to stand up to her sister, and she didn't want her sister to keep going down this path, but she hadn't dared tell anyone else either. The pressure had been building inside her for so long, growing heavier and heavier, and she didn't know when it would finally crush her completely. I live in fear every single day. Afraid of what my sister might do next. Afraid that Ricky will actually have his skin peeled off. We're already like this, we can't let Ricky turn into the same kind of monster. I've tried to talk her out of it. I've begged her. But she won't listen to a word I say. She calls it art. She calls it true beauty. I don't even dare tell anyone else. I don't know how people would treat us, things like us. Kawabi Maya buried her face in both hands and poured out all her fear and helplessness to Amamiya Rin in a torrent, like she was finally letting something loose that had been dammed up for far too long. Ugh, true beauty. Does she think she's Kawakami Tomi? As if stripping away the skin and exposing raw muscle is somehow perfect. Kawakami Tomi, listening through Amamiya Rin's consciousness, had been following Kawabi Maya's outpouring the whole time. The moment she caught that claim about the beauty of exposed musculature, a sound of scornful laughter echoed through Amamiya Rin's mind. Amamiya Rin kept his expression unchanged and listened in silence. He pulled a tissue from the box and held it out to Kawabi Maya. She took it, dabbed at her tears, and gave him a small, embarrassed smile. You've done more than enough. What your sister is doing can't be allowed to continue. I'll contact the police division that handles supernatural incidents, and have Mrs. Kawabi taken into custody. Amamiya Rin waited until her emotions had settled slightly before speaking. Taken into custody. Does it really have to go that far? Is there no other way? If Ricky's mother is a convicted criminal in prison. Kawabi Maya blinked, and a frown immediately creased her brow. Her expression closed off with a flash of resistance. She didn't finish the sentence, but what she left unspoken made Amamiya Rin understand at once. Right, bullying in Japan was a serious problem. If Ricky's mother ended up in prison and the story got out, the child would almost certainly become a target. That was thoughtless of me. I'm sorry. Amamiya Rin said it plainly. No, please don't apologize, this is my family's problem. I'm the one who's caused you trouble. Kawabi Maya was visibly surprised by his consideration and warmth, and she responded quickly, switching to more formal speech. Amamiya Rin thought it over. If sending her to prison would bring harm to an innocent child, then forfeiting the reward money was a small price to pay. After all, the woman might be unhinged, but she hadn't actually killed anyone. In terms of victims, Kawabi Maya was the only one, and Kawabi Maya clearly wasn't going to press charges against her own sister. If prison was off the table, well, as it happened, he had a skill that might solve the problem more cleanly. I can try using hypnosis to treat Mrs. Kawabi's condition. It may be possible to help with her mental illness. Amamiya Rin's hypnosis wasn't on the level of that singular eccentric whose effects persisted beyond death, but it was first-rate all the same. Treating a psychiatric disorder should be well within its reach. Really? At those words, Kawabi Maya shot to her feet in a surge of agitation, nearly launching herself at him. She pressed both hands flat on the coffee table and leaned her upper body toward him, like someone clutching at a lifeline. Real or not, there's only one way to find out. And it can't hurt you either way. Worst case, your sister goes to prison. The words had barely left his mouth when the rapid patter of small feet sounded from the hallway. Amamiya Rin turned his head, and Ricky came sprinting in from the corridor. "Mister, can you put Mom in prison right away?" Ricky ran up to the side of the sofa and fixed Amamiya Rin with an unwavering stare. At that, the corner of Amamiya Rin's mouth twitched, just barely, just once. Well, a model son if ever there was one. Ricky, don't say things like that. Kawabi Maya's expression changed at once. She hurried over and scooped the boy up into her arms. "If Mom's in prison, she can't bother us anymore." Ricky tilted his head back to look up at Kawabi Maya, and said it with a completely straight face. Kawabi Maya's expression went bleak. She pulled Ricky close and held him. She didn't explain her concerns to him. Ricky was still in kindergarten, and wouldn't have understood any of it anyway. "My sister leaves as soon as it gets dark and usually doesn't come home until after 9. Please wait a little while." Cradling Ricky, Kawabi Maya looked up at Amamiya Rin. Her expression was steeped in quiet bitterness. Amamiya Rin glanced at the clock on the wall. It had only just passed 8. He shifted his position, settled into a more comfortable angle against the sofa cushions, and looked over at Kawabi Maya. "While we wait for your sister to come back, I have one request. Would you let me look at the alchemy notes your brother-in-law left behind?" At that, a visible flash of reluctance crossed Kawabi Maya's face. "Those notes are the reason my sister ended up the way she is. The problem isn't in the knowledge itself, otherwise, why are you perfectly fine?" Amamiya Rin's tone was mild, but he didn't concede the point. In many horror stories, knowledge was its own curse, but in the case of the flesh-colored monster, the one who had clearly gone wrong was only Ricky's mother. Besides, the reason your skin and flesh have separated is the result of the alchemy working. I don't believe that having your skin stripped away constitutes eternal life. It's quite possible your brother-in-law made a mistake somewhere. I intend to hand those alchemy notes over to a specialist. There may be a chance to reverse what happened to you. Ghost Fire went more, Walnut Chan Fire Ghost. Fire New History, Ashi no Ko, co-starring with Kana Rima. Let's reach these milestones together. Direct hit 100 Power Stones equals +1 free chapter for all readers. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Novels Wonderland.